9. Freak escalator accident. In what can only be described as a truly bizarre and horrifying freak accident, a young Australian woman named Nikia Killick fell over an escalator handrail and plunged 2 stories to the ground. To make it even more tragic, she was celebrating her birthday in 2016. The incident happened at a shopping mall in the Gold Coast suburb of Broadbeach, leaving the 29-year-old with brain swelling and bleeding, broken ribs, a broken pelvis, and broken facial bones. Nikia's road to recovery was long and painful. She spent several days in a medically induced coma and was still hospitalized and unable to walk weeks after the fall. Due to her injuries, she had to learn how to walk all over again and struggled with certain things like spelling simple words and having conversations. In a piece written for the Same Here mental health movement webpage 2 years after the accident, Nikia wrote that in some ways, the mental and emotional challenges were worse than the physical obstacles she faced. She described feeling like nobody understood what was going on inside her mind, experiencing crippling anxiety, and wanting to sleep her life away while also being traumatized by nightmares. By the time she wrote the article, she was doing a lot better, but it took tremendous determination and support to get to and stay in a better place. 8. Reporter ruffles feathers. While working on a piece about political corruption in the Ivory Coast in 2004, investigative journalist Guy-André Kiefer was abducted from a shopping mall parking lot. Witnesses claimed that he was snatched by as many as 8 uniformed men in the country's capital. At the time, Kiefer was investigating money laundering and other alleged financial crimes that the government was accused of committing, as well as the country's cocoa trade, which allegedly poured its profits into the gun trade. He went to the mall to meet with someone claiming to be a source, but in hindsight, it appeared to have been a setup. The source, Michel Legre, was the brother-in-law of the country's first lady. He was arrested in connection with Kiefer's abduction and reportedly ratted on several government officials during police questioning. But he and all other suspects were eventually released, and their cases were dropped due to a lack of evidence. In the days leading up to the kidnapping, Kiefer had told his family that he was becoming increasingly concerned about his safety. He had been in the Ivory Coast for 2 years, but had only recently started receiving threats. He hasn't been seen since the abduction, and the case appears no closer to being solved now than it was after it first happened. Detectives remain open-minded to several possible motives, including personal financial gain, state-sponsored retribution, or a grudge. Most people believe Kiefer is dead, but his wife Osange told the Committee for Protecting Journalists that she plans to hold out hope until or unless her husband's remains are found. 7. Drunk parenting in mall parking lot. One evening in 2016, police found 2 young mothers behaving strangely in the parking lot of a mall in Salem, New Hampshire. They would later accuse 22-year-old Bailey LaColst and 24-year-old Amber Giordano of being drunk out of their minds. They were so drunk they could barely stand up. As the officers approached, they noticed one of the women lying on her back in a mud puddle and holding her child above her head. The women allegedly admitted to drinking alcohol and were each charged with 1 count of endangering the welfare of a child. They were then taken into custody and were later released without bail, pending the outcome of their cases, and their children were handed over to the care of family members. The case was also reported to the state's Child Protection Agency. 6. Secret living space. In 2003, an artist named Michael Townsend set up a secret apartment inside the parking garage of a Rhode Island mall. He collaborated with 7 other artists to make the 750 square foot, 70 meters squared space livable. And they took turns living there for 3 weeks at a time. Hidden behind a utility door and a cinder block wall, the apartment was fully furnished and even had a china cabinet and a PlayStation 2. There was no running water, so the occupants used the mall's bathrooms. Townsend would later claim that he was inspired by an advertisement that mentioned how neat it would be to live at the mall, and that he wanted to better understand life as a shopper. At the very least, it was the story he gave after mall security caught him and another artist trespassing on the property in 2007, bringing their unconventional experiment to an end. According to Providence Place Mall spokesman Dante Bellini Jr., the so-called apartment was little more than a space filled with stuff. But several members of local law enforcement were admittedly intrigued enough to come and check the site out, and some reportedly even seemed impressed that the artists had managed to trespass on private property for 4 years before they were noticed. Townsend and his ex-wife took the rap for the entire group and were the only ones charged in the case. He luckily managed to avoid jail time and was sentenced to probation. But the legal consequences seemed like a secondary concern to Townsend, who was more disappointed that he fell short of his goal to turn the space into a fully functioning apartment. 5. Fort Worth Missing Trio. Mary Rachel Trilka, Lisa Renee Wilson, and Julianne Mosley went shopping together at a mall in Fort Worth, Texas on the day before Christmas Eve in 1974. They didn't plan to stay past 4:00 p.m. because they had other plans for that evening. So their families were quick to call the police when they didn't return home. The women were never seen or heard from again, and their disappearance remains a mystery to this day. Authorities initially assumed they were runaways, a belief that seemed to be supported by a letter Rachel Trilka's husband, Tommy, received the next morning, saying that the trio had gone to Houston. Their loved ones would later claim that the police continued refusing to take the case seriously, even after the car the women had driven to the mall was found abandoned in the parking lot. Numerous handwriting experts have examined the letter received by Tommy Trilka, only to determine that the results were inconclusive. The women's families never believed Rachel wrote the note, or that she and her friends ran away. They eventually hired a private detective, John Swaim, who took his own life 4 years later and left behind a note ordering for the case file to be destroyed. In the years since, several investigators have been assigned to the case. Acres upon acres of land have been combed through. Cars have been pulled from rivers, and suspects have been investigated only to be ruled out. Nearly 50 years later, the women's families continue to hold out hope that evidence will be found or someone with key information will finally come forward and help deliver long-awaited answers. 4. Dangerously distracting photo shoot. During a photo shoot outside a Pittsburgh strip mall in 2017, 22-year-old Chelsea Guerra, better known by her modeling name Fox Jane, posed in nothing but thigh-high stockings and stilettos in broad daylight. She was hired for the gig by a 64-year-old photographer named Michael Warnock, and neither of the two seemed the least bit bothered that what they were doing might offend some bystanders, or that there was a children's clothing store nearby. Not surprisingly, police stopped to question the pair, who reportedly insisted that their activities were strictly professional and artistic. Guerra and Warnock were initially charged with criminal solicitation and conspiracy, but pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of disorderly conduct, sparing them from prison time and slapping them with a $300 fine each. Speaking with local station WTAE, Guerra said that she started modeling to put herself through college, and that she was truly sorry if she offended anyone. In hindsight, she admitted that she and Warnock should have probably chosen a less conspicuous place to hold the photo shoot. 3. Baby snatcher strikes. In what a judge later described as every mother's worst fear, a woman named Sherry Amour befriended the mom of a newborn at a mall in Prussia, Pennsylvania one day in 2016. After inviting the woman to eat together in the food court, Amour snatched the 7-week-old and fled the scene. By then, Amour had allegedly been faking a pregnancy to her family and friends for at least 7 months, and had taken the ruse so far that she allowed her loved ones to throw her a baby shower. With over 100 guests in attendance, when she arrived at her parents' house with the baby she stole, she claimed the infant had been taken away from her at birth after testing positive for drugs, but that the authorities had given the child back to her. But it wasn't long before Amour's family grew suspicious and tipped off the police, who tracked the suspect down at her apartment hours after the incident and arrested her for kidnapping. Thankfully, the baby was unharmed and was reunited with his mother, who probably hasn't let him out of her sight ever since. Amour's defense lawyer argued that his client was grieving the loss of her own child when she committed the crime. In the throes of a mental breakdown, she believed the little boy was hers. Prosecutors painted a more diabolical picture, claiming that Amour enjoyed the attention she got during her alleged fake pregnancy. She pleaded guilty of kidnapping and child concealment and was sentenced to 1.5 to 7 years in prison. At her sentencing, Amour admitted to stealing the baby and apologized for her actions. 2. The Springfield Mall abduction. 60-year-old Barbara "Bobby" Bosworth was walking to her car after a shopping trip to the Springfield Mall in Virginia in 2008 when 2 young men abducted her at gunpoint with a BB gun they stole from the sporting goods store. Mall security failed to stop the theft or kidnapping, and the company would later successfully argue in court that it had no duty to keep Bobby safe under Virginia law. The kidnappers, later identified as Lutchman Chandler and Keith Bakersville, forced Bobby into her car and drove to a convenience store in Prince William County, where they tried to withdraw money from an ATM using her credit card and then forced her to buy beer. Employees noticed that the victim was in distress and begged their manager to dial 911 or to let them call the police. He allegedly said no, but a bystander dialed 911. While inside the store, Bobby called her husband and used coded language to let him know something was wrong. He called the police, but by the time they caught up with the perpetrators and their captive, they had crashed the car into a grove of trees. Bobby and Chandler died from their injuries. Bakersville suffered a severe head injury, which only worsened his existing mental health issues. The tragedy left many wondering why more wasn't done to stop the kidnappers or to put a stop to the ongoing problem of violence at the mall where Bobby was abducted. People also questioned why nobody did more to intervene at the convenience store, where the terror on Bobby's face could be seen plain as day. It seemed to a lot of people like there were numerous missed opportunities to save her life, even if it was technically nobody's duty to step in. 1. Trapped and forgotten. During a visit from his home in Tasmania to Sydney, Australia in 2017, 71-year-old Bernard Gore got lost in a collection of corridors and stairwells at a local shopping mall. When he failed to meet his wife, Angela, as planned, she reported him missing. His disappearance was especially concerning because he suffered from dementia, and Angela knew he could have easily gotten confused. Police searched the public areas of the mall and found no sign of the senior citizen. They didn't check surveillance footage, which would have undoubtedly helped investigators find him much sooner. And they didn't bother looking in areas that were closed to the public. But Bernard's whereabouts remained a mystery for 3 weeks, until a maintenance worker entered a stairwell and found his lifeless body slumped over in a partial kneeling position. An emergency door had shut behind him and locked him in. According to the medical examiner, it appeared as though Bernard had sat down in a chair that was found near his body, but at some point fell forward onto the floor. Sadly, Bernard's death may not have been quick and without suffering. Coroner's assistant Anna Mitchellmore said that he might have been alive for as long as a week after becoming trapped. If detectives had checked the video, they would have seen Bernard entering the area, which is off limits to the public and consists of 6 to 8 miles, 10 to 13 kilometers of tunnels and fire exits. These passageways are typically only inspected once a month, according to a coroner's inquest, which explains why it took so long for someone to discover the retired barber's body. According to a coroner's inquest report, the footage showed the exact door he went through shortly before he realized he was in the wrong place and became hopelessly lost. A new team of detectives who took over the case criticized the initial investigation for failing to search more thoroughly before searching for Bernard outside of the mall. The coroner agreed and officially ruled that the death resulted from inadequate search procedures and ineffective communication. To prevent another needless tragedy from happening, he made numerous recommendations to improve searches for missing persons in New South Wales. Thanks for watching. Would you rather get trapped in a shopping mall overnight, completely by accident, and then be arrested for trespassing? Or feel obligated to intervene in a violent situation at a shopping mall while a guard stands there doing nothing? Let me know in the comments below.